You're listening to the Flyingdutchman podcast, and I'm your host, Dutch. On this episode, we interview Taylor Fox, a former F-16, F-22 pilot. And if you think you have to be an Academy graduate to get a pilot slot, well, that's not necessarily true. And if you think you have to go to the Air Force ROTC, that's not necessarily true. Today, in this episode from Taylor Fox, we're going to learn another avenue to secure yourself in the airframe of your choice. There's a lot of prep work, but well worth it. Let's begin the show. Good afternoon, good day, wherever you are. I want to welcome you to the Flying Dutchman podcast, episode 1, as a matter of fact. So you'll have nothing but perfection from this moment forward. And I want to welcome our guest today, Taylor Fox. He is a former F-16 driver, F-22, a current Delta pilot. We'll get to that all in a quick jiffy. But first off, we want to talk about Mr. Taylor, about you. Where'd you grow up? What were your influences in life? And tell us a little bit about that.
Yeah, Dutch. I grew up in Springfield, Missouri. Spent from basically 0 to 22 there. Went to the University of Missouri. I was a big golfer, basketball player. But then in beginning of high school or so, my grandpa has always been an influence. He flew the F-86 for the Air Force in the 50s.
Nice.
And I just grew up flying airplanes. He had an old Stearman. He rebuilt himself 3 different times, and he taught me how to fly, starting at age 11, but then I started getting my licenses very young, and my life kind of oriented in the aviation direction from a very young age.
So he had a Stearman. That's exceptional. What paint scheme was that Stearman in?
It was the Navy yellow and then blue, I guess it is. But yeah, it's a beautiful airplane, and it's become a symbol of our family, and people have known it. It's been our family for 40 or 50 years by now.
Wow. So people will see this yellow Stearman and they would know, hey, that's the Fox family Stearman. You got to choose.
That's right. Yeah, he's from a small town in Missouri, and he'd do an air show for the 4th of July every 4th of July. But it's a town of, I think, 8,000 people or so, and I mean, he's been such an influence and an icon in that town that they named the airport is now Fox Field, named after him, and it's got a monument with his name on it and everything for his contributions. And he's still with us, 90, 91, 92 years old. Wow. That's legacy he's leaving behind there. Yeah.
That is a nice legacy. That is a very nice legacy. And you were and he had a Stearman, and he had what else?
Oh, a myriad of airplanes along the way. He also started a flight department for a businessman that was very successful in that hometown and flying corporate jets. So I got to kind of start tagging along, flying right seat in corporate jets when I was 16, 17, 18 years old. And just a real nice opportunity that I stumbled into.
Yeah, that is a very nice opportunity. And that was the corporate jet. Did it operate out of Foxfield?
It did, yeah. And we're talking about Monette, Missouri. Yeah, there was a fleet of 4, 5, 6 of them that we would fly out of there. It was 5,000 feet. So it was a shortish runway, but enough for a citation. Where we flew out of, yeah.
Oh, that's pretty exciting. So you're 16 years old, you're in high school, and you worked on a private pilot's license?
Yep. Yeah. I was one of those guys that, on my birthday, my 17th birthday, I got the first legal moment I could. I got my private, solo when I was 16, and then commercial right when I turned 18, that kind of stuff. And before going off to college.
Oh, interesting. You probably were able to get some hours in. Now, did you solo at any time with the Stearman?
Yeah, I sold a 152 when I was 16, and about a week and a half later. I mean, the Stearman, I sold it. Yeah, like I said, a week and a half later. It's much more difficult to fly, a magnitude of probably 10, especially to land. You can't see over the front. It's unforgiving, any crab or crosswind, or so. I was a lot prouder of that solo, even though it wasn't my first airplane solo, because that plane, you earn it when you land that one safely.
And tail draggers can be especially challenging. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, that's what I'm saying. You can't land any crab, and the fact that you can't see over the dashboard makes that one even harder to see any drift or angle when you're coming to land there. Yeah.
Well, that's a testament to your grandfather's confidence in your flying ability to let you take that.
Right.
And what were those referred to as the yellow peril in the Navy training? Is that what
Yeah, I've seen that before. Yeah.
Yeah. That now I guess we up front we could mention that you're also an author of a book that I have a copy of that I read. And so I got a little insights that our audience is going to become privy to. And I made me some notes. So if I look off to the left, maybe that's bad for podcasting. I don't know. But what are youps?
Youps. Yeah, no, that was
What
just
are
a
youps?
funny way to kick things off. They're just loops, but the 3-year-old Taylor couldn't pronounce the L's, so I just called them youps. But I was definitely mortified for the first 11 years of my life that my grandpa was going to flip that plane upside down. And then at some point, I remember distinctly, I was 11, and the switch flipped, and this definitely, I couldn't get on roller coasters. I couldn't get on airplanes with my grandpa because I thought he was going to trick me.
Yeah.
And then that switched, and I went full the opposite way. I wanted to only do loops and became a fighter pilot and the whole works. So,
Wow.
yeah.
Well, that is totally cool. And what's interesting when I'm reading the book is that I always was under the impression that, hey, if you want to be a fighter pilot, you got to be let's speak in Air Force, is you got to go to the Air Force Academy, you got to score high, you have to have an aeronautical degree, and then you might get accepted, and you still have to compete. But you learned a different way to get a seat, and a guaranteed seat, if you passed all those challenges that are before you to get that far. What did you do?
Yeah, I mean, it is a loophole in the system to become a military aviator or a fighter pilot that most guys don't know. And even when I was in the Air Force pilot training program, all the guys that are active duty generally were shocked to find out this loophole existed. But basically, I mean, you gotta do some legwork up front. You've got to have your college degree. You got to have your pilot's license. But then there's this Air National Guard and the Air Force Reserves that can hire people off the street. And so I showed up in a suit and tie. As a civilian, I was a college kid getting a finance degree, completely unrelated. And, if that unit flies F-16 fighter jets and you apply to be a pilot there, the odds of you getting accepted are lower than if you go the ROTC route, something like that. But once you are accepted, you have an F-16 spot. And as long as you can pass pilot training with the, fighter qualification, which, the hardest part's getting in the door. You got to work hard the whole time in pilot training as well. But once you have that spot, you have a guaranteed fighter spot. Whereas the active duty guys, the guys that went to the Air Force Academy or ROTC, once they got to pilot training or undergraduate pilot training, they still had to compete against their other guys they're flying with. In addition to just the needs of the Air Force, sometimes the Air Force they overstaff fighter pilots, and so you could be the top guy in your class and not get a fighter jet, and some classes you might be the worst guy in the class and get a fighter jet. So you eliminate a lot of variables by going the Air National Guard route. Granted, I paid for college. You still have to do well in college. They want you to have good grades. There's some admin. You got to rush the units, be likable and approach them and buy them beer, theoretically. But that's typically how it goes.
Well, it so happens I'm starting a fighter squadron, so I invite anybody out there to bring me beer, and I'll guarantee you a slot in this F-16 right here.
There you go.
But so let's expand on that a little bit. Is that you have to approach the fighter squadron does not, like where I'm at, south of us in Fresno, they fly the Eagle. That's a National Guard unit there. And so you have to actually solicit a squadron. They don't look for you. You have to look for them. What is that like?
It's very difficult. It was very difficult 15 years ago when I was doing it. I assume it's gotten a little easier, but I don't know. It's a supply and demand issue, right? Like there's a lot of people that want to be fighter pilots. And so they typically would have 100, 150 people in South Dakota, at least where I got hired, apply for 1 or 2 spots. So the odds of hiring are not great, but it's a supply and demand issue. So I made an Excel spreadsheet of every fighter unit in the country. I didn't care where it was. At that time, I didn't know the difference between a general and a sergeant. So I was just very green. But I just kept calling and saying, hey, I really like to fly fighter jets at the F-16 at your unit. When you're hiring board, they hire one or two of us, off the civilian street folks a year. Most units do. And so you find out when they do that every year, and you start applying, and it's a cumbersome process. But of all the people I know that have gone through it, if people were truly committed and dedicated to flying fighter jets and kept applying, everyone I know eventually got a spot somewhere. It might have taken a couple years. It might have taken 10 interviews, but everyone I know ended up getting it, and from my experience.
Wow, that's something. That I could imagine right now that some people that might be watching this are going, "Oh my gosh, I was unaware." But not to throw shade on you, but you were also not accepted by some of the places you applied for because it's not a guarantee.
Yeah, I mean, like I said, it's it's 100 to 150 people usually apply for 1 or 2, 3 spots a year, so it's a tough road, but a lot of those people are probably not qualified in some form out the get-go, so that eliminates a lot of them. But at the same time too, like that, Alabama passed me up, and I remember feeling very down and dejected. I was like, what else could my resume look like? I worked very hard. My grades were pretty good. I had a ton of flying experience, flying formation, aerobatics. Like, what more could they want out of a 22-year-old kid? But at the end of the day, they hired a couple of great guys. I'm still friends with both of them to this day, actually. One of them's one of my best friends. And, one of them especially, he didn't have much flying experience, but he was prior enlisted in that unit. So, it's I can talk as much as I want about how much I want to be a fighter pilot, but if that guy has signed up for their unit, he's worked on F-16s, he's proven himself with action, that's worth a lot of weight. I might have been a better looking resume. I don't know if I was or not, but the fact that he had shown up and swore into the military and already put his time in was worth a lot to them. Dedication, and it goes a long ways when you're hiring somebody.
So you did get accepted by a squadron, the Lobos.
That's right,
South Dakota National Guard. Yeah, and that's a handsome. I like the markings on the tail.
That's right.
It's very cool markings, cool patch. So you were accepted. Now you have to get your slot for undergraduate pilot training. Is that where you would go next?
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole bunch of security vetting, then they take you to officer training school, where you get yelled at and get through your. Fortunately, I didn't have to go to boot camp. You kind of get to skip that as you're already in a rated position as an officer. But you go to that, and then you go to undergraduate pilot training for 13 months or so.
Where was that at?
Mine was at Shepherd Air Force Base in Texas, which is famously the InJet program, which stands for Euro-NATO Joint Jet Pilot Training, I think. Yeah. So we had Italians in our class. There were Germans in classes nearby, and Norwegians. Probably missing a few countries out, but typically the fighter track. But a lot of foreigners there, which was a lot of fun.
That would be a lot of fun, and that would make another reason for Shepherd to be desirable is especially potlucks must have been really interesting.
The Germans put on a great Oktoberfest every year.
Oh, I bet.
Yeah,
I bet. Yeah. Do you ever stay in touch through with any of those gentlemen or ladies that work there?
Yeah, I've got I've got a couple Germans that were my instructors that I talk about in the book a lot. I see them almost, I'd say, annually. I travel a lot. I'm a Delta pilot now, so I fly over that part of the world, and my sister lives in Italy, so I'm over there all the time, and I run into them. There's an Italian named Cheech that I reference a lot in my book. He's a recent father as of this year. Oh, congratulations. But I see him all the time. So, there's about 7 or 8 of them, the Italians or Germans that I stay in touch with loosely.
It's a special bond that's formed when you guys go through that and experience and struggle and help each other. And you do reference Cheech in the book. I'm a little forgetful here. Was Cheech the call sign, or was Cheech a play on his name? It was just easier to say Cheech than Cheech.
Yeah. His name is Francesco, and Cheech is like the abbreviated version that Italians use for Francesco. Just like a William and Bill kind of situation. Francesco and Cheech. Chicho, I think, is actually what it is, but we just call him Cheech for short.
What did
Yeah.
Cheech end up? What airframe did he end up getting?
He got the Tornado.
Ooh, yeah,
The Italians. Yeah.
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 They're gonna. I think they might be driving the Tornadoes a little bit longer, but not as long as the
Right.
Germans are going to
Right.
fly
Right.
theirs.
Right.
The Now you arrive at Shepherd. Now that at this time the T-37's already been replaced, correct?
Correct.
So you got the Texan 2, the T6 Texan 2.
Yeah.
What was your
Wonderful.
impression? What was
I
your
loved
impression of
it
that?
so much.
Did
I mean,
you?
it's essentially like a World War II fighter, horsepower comparison wise.
Mhm.
But man, just from flying all the planes I flew as a kid, that did some aerobatics and stuff like that, just the power. And it was, bubble canopy was awesome. And finally putting on the uniform and mask and it was a great time.
So stepping to the aircraft was probably pretty cool at that point with your flight suit on, and
Yeah,
you guys have the opportunity to design your own squadron patch, training
that's
squadron
right.
patch.
Yeah. Yeah. Each class does their own.
What
Ours
was
was at a time in the Air Force when I remember that we typically wear those tan shirts, and then on Fridays you get to wear a colored shirt. And right when we got into pilot training, they banned the Friday colored shirt as a hit on morale, and so our patch was a fight against that. And so we made our Friday patch a colored shirt that we would then put on and put little patches on it, and it was
nice. Yeah,
pushback against man. Yeah.
exactly. And I want to say to that same string is that no matter how many times they try, and by they I mean whether it be politically correct or just whatever, is the pushback is always, they can never outsmart the pushback, no matter what rule comes down there, and regardless of the branch, the pushback is pretty clever, and they never see it coming. But flying the T6, how many hours did you have to put in before you progressed from that?
Roughly 120 hours, 130 hours, I think we got in the T6 back then. I know they're cutting that down every year as simulators get better and money gets tighter, but I know that's what we got.
Mm-hmm. And the simulators do get better, don't they?
Yeah, they're pretty good. Yeah.
Do you think there'll ever be a time where maybe the simulator is overkill? They need to really get some stick time in the air in the 3-dimensional, or?
Yeah, I mean, I will say the simulators were good in the Air Force. The simulators I fly for Delta are shockingly good. Like the thing isn't moving, but as you're moving down the runway, it feels like you're accelerating somehow, because the thing is like tipping back and it's bouncing off of simulated cracks in the runway. The Air Force simulators, none of them moved, at least in the fighter world. None of them moved. They're just stationary. They just sit there you're in a dome with visuals all around you. I will say, at Delta, they replaced landings. In fact, I just went to landing recurrency sim this week where, that was my 3 takeoff and landings for the 90 days. And that's good enough, because it's real enough. Mm-hmm. Having said that, it never feels the same, right? The heart rate increasing, when emergencies are happening, it really matters when your pink butt's in that sim or the plane and not the sim.
right. A lot of Martin Bakers getting sucked up along with these twos. But
that's right.
Yeah, and I just I'm losing my train of thought, but forgive me for that. So anyway, going from the T6, did you would transfer over to the T-38?
That's right.
Is that right? And which is on the verge of being replaced. But in the T-38, did you also train at Shepherd?
We stayed there. Yeah.
You just moved over to a new building, and now things are going to happen a little faster in the jet.
Yep.
And the T-38 is a challenge, and it's a challenge in the landing pattern because of stall characteristics or something. It's something to be aware of. What exactly is that?
Yeah, you're making me reflect back on about 13, 12 years ago. But it's just, you're in a fighter pattern. I think we were 45, 60 degrees of bank around the final turn. You want to keep it as close to the airport as you could.
Mm-hmm.
and you're wrapping around the final turn. And I don't remember what the AOA is, but if all airplanes have an AOA at which they stall. The
And that's
F-22,
angle of attack.
that's right. Thank you.
Uh-huh.
The F-22 can do a little magic past that AOA with its thrust vectoring. But most airplanes, there's an AOA, angle of attack at which it'll stall. And I know we were just flying it very closely to that angle of attack. And so, if you were to accidentally exceed it, and you can do that by either pulling back on the stick too hard or getting slow, it could stall, and that plane, depending on how that plane was bent, those things are 50, 60 years old, it might snap off one direction. If a wing stalls first, it might roll in a direction. And if you're 1,000 feet above the ground, that might not be enough time to recover. So that was the fear they ingrained into our brains, to not exceed that amount.
When you say the jet is bent, is that just like a slang, or are we actually talking about a twist in the airframe, or a bent that the airflow will actually be affected?
Yeah, every especially a plane that's 60 years old, especially a plane that has been max performed, in a lot of regimes doing high G maneuvers, metal fatigues, and if a kid snaps on the stick and it or pulls the stick back really aggressively and over G's it, it might slightly bend the plane a little bit. When we would after that training, we'd go on to IFF, Introduction to Final Fundamentals, and those planes again are constantly at the max rate, max G force for our turns, because you're dogfighting, so you're trying to get every degree per second out of those turns.
Mm-hmm.
Those planes you could feel. You could be like, oh yeah, that's that one that kind of rolls to the left when you get to high G's, because it's literally bent.
Would you recognize it by the tail number?
Oh yeah. We had nicknames for them, all kinds of stuff.
Really?
Yeah.
What were the instructor pilots like? Were they you had German instructor pilots? You had Italian instructor pilots?
Yeah. Everyone's different.
They are.
But I would, some of the German instructor pilots were my favorite ones. Actually, my favorite instructor in all of UPT was a German guy, a very soft-spoken, nice, empathetic guy, which is, not the German stereotype. We had a different one that was more of the German stereotype, which was just very hard. Like, this is the way it is. I don't want to hear anything else. No excuses, like blah, blah, blah. So, everyone was different, but,
and I maybe I phrased it wrong, but yeah, everybody is different. But it was interesting is that just because you're an American student doesn't mean you're going to get an American instructor.
Right.
While reading the book, and I'm sorry if I keep going back to that, but it was a very good insight into what goes on, is that there were times where you did not agree with something and you respectfully pushed back and provided your reasoning, your logic, why.
Right.
And then there are times where it's best you just professionally don't say nothing.
Right.
And let it go. And there's life lessons in this book that you don't have to be in the military. You don't have to be an aviator to pick up on some of those key things in the business world. And I get it.
Yeah. I mean, there are even in the Air Force or even everywhere, there's people who are better instructors than others, right? Or better teachers than others. And once I became an instructor in the F-22 and went through that process of how to become a good instructor, some of it really illuminates. And I don't know which exactly, I haven't read my book in almost 7-8 years, but like, if I'm thinking of the stories you're maybe telling me, one of the first things I was taught, when you're seeking to influence, when you're seeking to teach as an instructor, you need to seek to understand where they're coming from. Like, why did the student do whatever they're doing? And so you should generally start by asking questions. Did you see the airplane do this? Why did you do this? What was your game plan? If you're an instructor that's just like, hey, you screwed this up, this is the way it goes, you're probably going to miss the mark. You need to seek to understand where they're coming from. And in case of pilot training, I don't mean this to be arrogant at all, but some of those guys were first assignment instructors where they flew for 250 hours in pilot training, and now they were given an instructor assignment. So now they're an instructor with 250 hours in an airplane. Whereas I came into pilot training with 1,500 hours, which I'm not saying it was as good of flying as the instructors, but I probably had more experience with weather, for example. I dealt with thunderstorms and flying around weather and could see things that I could teach them. And that one German instructor, I a couple times was teaching him about weather, and he wasn't too arrogant to be like, "Hey, I'm your instructor. You shouldn't be teaching me anything." No, he understood and recognized strengths and weaknesses, and I thought, I respect that guy more than anybody. And then you then trusted him, right? If he's willing to seek the truth, not a hierarchy and an authoritarianism. Now I'm gonna really trust what you say when you tell me this something should be this way. You really get on board with a human like that.
Definite reciprocal relationship.
Right.
What one of the things that as a civilian pilot that crossed over to your military flying was fuel awareness. Is that fuel is money, and especially when you're a civilian pilot. And I picked up on, I had no idea how to relate pounds to range and throttle settings and altitude and where you could, get up high if you're low on fuel and then just coast back down, or, you're flying over Washington, D.C. and you got 7,000 pounds and you're okay because you can make it all the way back to Luke, Arizona near Phoenix.
Right.
And these big war games that are across states on some of these. And I really didn't know those level of detail, but you're being a civilian pilot first and being aware of fuel and the cost associated with it was an easy migration for you flying in the military. One we're going to get to is air refueling, but before we go there is you're advancing along in the T-38. You're brought up a term referred to as hooked. Hooked means that you did not qualify in a flight profile of some sort. Is that correct?
Yeah, it means failed. I think it kind of comes from you get a U. It kind of looks like, actually, I'm not sure what the
exit stage left.
Like a hook, kind of it's an unsatisfactory on that flight.
Oh, okay.
You're going to get to do it again. Yeah.
Okay. And even though you start out with the class of 12, 11, 9, whatever, and you've gone through the T6, you have the 120 hours or whatever the hours were for the T6. Now you're flying the T-38, supersonic jet. You could still be disqualified and terminated from the training program. And that has happened. You've seen that happen.
Yeah. They usually said about 10% of every class attrits as an average number. Yeah. At least back then. And I think in our class, I mean, it happened 3 or 4 weeks prior to graduation after a 13-month program. They're just, I don't know I wasn't an instructor in that environment. I don't know what that's like, but, as an instructor later on in the F-22, there just comes a point where it is a dangerous business. It requires, a certain level of preparation, performance, aptitude, and if multiple repeated, usually they're safety related events are going to drive a hook. If it's something that could get you or somebody else killed, you're going to have to see that one again. And if you had to see it so many times again, then no more. But
right. And you guys are graded on almost everything, every aspect, and including your attitudes. And when you have an individual that are hooking rides, but they have an excuse for everything except for ownership of the mistake, that stands out to an instructor and to instructors. And if this person, not that big excuses, but if somebody continues to hook a ride, their last evaluation is with the squadron commander or is with the wing or a higher ranking.
Someone who
will have the last word on this. And do they go to a non-ejection seat aircraft after that, since so much has already been invested in flying? Or
I think that's I think that's typically the answer. I think it depends a little bit on what the problems are. Is it more in the high performance problems of not pulling up G's, doing all that kind of stuff, but can land and take the plane off safely? Great. If it's more of that kind of an issue, an admin related issue, taking off, landing, just navigating, if that's too much, then maybe not. But I think they took everything on a case by case basis.
Okay. Because I would, if it were me, that'd be a hard pill to swallow for anybody. But if they said, but so you can fly anything without an ejection seat, I'd still be going, oh, cool. Right. We're going to go back to stepping to the jets. We're stepping up to the T-38 this is going to be your first flight. Was your first flight an afterburner takeoff? Is every flight an afterburner takeoff in the 38?
I believe if I remember correctly, every flight is an afterburner takeoff. In the
What was that like?
Yeah.
You've flown, you've got hours, civilian time. Now you've been flying, the T-28. Now you're in for the Northrop T-38. As old as it is, it's a sexy jet. And
right.
With the afterburner takeoff, that's your first experience. What was that like? If you remember or not, I don't know, but I just think that
yeah, it is
not compared to a 16 or 22, but
yeah, it was something I was right. Yeah, that was a moment I remember I was looking forward to for a very long time. And the one thing I'm trying to remember what that moment really did feel like. I remember as it was rolling down the runway, being like, "Yes!" Like the crescendo of excitement is, the afterburner. You could feel them kick in because they wouldn't kick in at the same time. It'd be like one then the other, and you'd slowly keep moving down the runway. I will say I remember I looked down right as we were cleared for takeoff, and I looked down and none of my seatbelts were hooked up. And I remember being in a panic. I've got an instructor behind me. I'm getting graded, right? Like I need to perform. And I just remember being like very stressed and anxious and annoyed and trying to get myself all put together in that moment. So that was that one. I lost a little excitement from that afterburner takeoff. I remember my F-16 one better, but but no, I mean they're cool.
You weren't strapped in. At what level were you strapped in?
If I remember correctly, there's one single point harness that, both shoulder straps come in, both leg straps come in. There might even, and I think that had been undone. Lord knows how it happened. I'm sure I did it and just bumped it, or who knows. Maybe I never did it in the first place because I was so excited to have my first afterburner takeoff. But I remember I looked down and thought, "Oh shit!" And excuse me,
but because I'm when I see somebody stepping in the jet, there's a crew chief with them. They get inside the cockpit, and the crew chief is in there handing them straps and assisting with hooking things up. So when you're flying the T-38, you did not require a crew chief to do that for you then, or to be there with you in that process.
I'm sure on my first flight, someone helped me to make sure I did it right. To this day, I have no idea what had happened on that flight, but
I'm glad you caught it. And your instructor was none the wiser, huh? And your instructor was none the wiser.
As long as right. I just didn't want to get a downgrade on my grades. So
you scored fairly well throughout your training. You had a few bumps and stuff, but you have done well up to this point.
Yeah, I mean, I had a nice head start with civilian flying. I had a leg up on a lot of guys with flying experience. And then I just had this, more than any point in my life, a passion. And I've noticed this about a lot of projects I've done in my life since, where I just, if it works out, great. Like this book, for example, like it was fun to write and it was easy to do. But if it comes together, fine. If it doesn't, that's okay. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to be a fighter pilot with every fiber in my body, to the exclusion of going out on the weekends during pilot training. But it wasn't going to be because of preparation that I was not going to do well in that class. So, I've never been more dedicated to anything in my life, which worked out well for pilot training, at least.
It very much did work out well because you achieved your dreams. So we are now at IFF Introduction to Fighter Fundamentals in the T-38. I'm sorry, the T-38.
Yeah.
And you get to graduate now. And you are getting orders to report to Luke Air Force Base, Arizona, for F-16 training. And you got to call your pop. You got to call your granddad and tell him this, didn't you?
Oh yeah. I mean, I called him on probably about every other flight all through pilot training. He was right next to me the whole way, essentially, hearing all those stories. But yeah, the whole point had been to fly a fighter jet by myself for one time, and that was like the goal of everything. So I was ecstatic during that phase of my life, for sure. But so much stress and anticipation too.
I bet. And again, you have a good circle of family around you, and that stands out reading your book. And there's a photograph of some of your family members, and I'm getting ahead of the story here. where they were all standing on the wing of an F-16 when they come to visit you.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool. So you report to Luke, and there is a high level expectation from the instructors that you guys will do this right, and you are going to learn to be a war fighter. You are going to learn to be a fighter pilot, and that your introduction would be walking up to a 2-seater F-16 for your first flight. And that the complications, the speeds, just everything, you really got to be on your game with this. And did you find what you learned in the T6 to T38? There was some things that did not migrate into the training that prepared you for the F-16, or do you feel it was a proper transition?
I've got to compliment the Air Force. I thought it was a great transition. It was every step got harder, every step got more complicated, from the T6 to the T38, and then the F-16, and even the F-16. You didn't start dropping bombs and shooting missiles on the first flight. The first flight was very basic. Just go up, get a feel for the aircraft, fly around, go supersonic, do a GX. Practice landings. So, there were moments I was stressed and felt behind a little bit, but there was never I thought the Air Force did a great job of slowly bringing you along and having you prepared.
And prior to reporting to Luke for the 16 training, we talked a little bit about the simulators that you were trained in, and those were more procedural type simulators. Were the F-16 simulators more immersive, or was it still kind of a procedural?
No, they could get with it pretty well. They could link those simulators up, with other simulators. We could fly together. We would, the first probably 10 or 15 simulators were about emergencies and landing the airplane, because you're going to be by yourself. So you got to pass an emergency simulator ride where an instructor, throws all these emergencies at you. It's a fun but stressful simulator ride where it's, you're catching on fire, you've got failures, all kinds of stuff. But then after that, everything just becomes tactical. There's like a distinct moment where once you are qualified to fly the F-16 and you have your driver's license, if you will, after that, it's mostly all tactics and a little bit of remember how the emergencies go too. But then, we're linking the simulators up and we're fighting 2 or 4 F-16s versus, 8 bandits, and we're shooting at them. The simulators got many towns in there that we're practicing dropping bombs on, and stuff like that. So just comes into a child, video game dream basically at that point.
You have instructors that are teaching you how to fly the jet. They're number one in flight lead, or they might be in the front seat and you're in the back seat. The instructors that run the simulators are not those same instructors, are they?
Sometimes. Generally, the emergency guys are usually retired fighter pilots, older guys that just want to keep staying in the community. And then the tactical simulators. It's usually a mix. Sometimes they have those guys, but the important simulator rides, they always have a green bag, a flight suit wearing current fighter pilot administer that test or something like that. So it's a mix.
Wow. How many hours in F-16 training were you?
Honestly, I have no idea. Probably a 70, 80, I'm guessing. I think the program was 9 months when I went through it, but maybe not even that many hours.
I'm going to bring up this. The F-16 is you are sitting here.
Right.
That is a little pencil in front of you. What is it like to sit in the F-16 and have that canopy come down? And I mean, the rail is at your waist practically.
Yeah.
What sensation is that like?
It's uncomparable from every other jet I've sat in. Not even close, even in the F-22. The visibility in the F-16 is amazing. You just feel like you're hanging on the tip of this spear. It's basically just this. The F-16 is not a big airplane, really. Just got this one huge motor, and you're just sitting out on the tip of the spear in front of it, and you can see everywhere. Honestly, the visibility is my favorite part about that airplane. What you're describing, yeah. The F-22, the canopy rail, I don't know where it sits, but it's a lot higher up. Yeah. So you're kind of more enclosed, but the F-22 feels like, or the F-16 feels like you're about to fall out on the ground or something. You're so far out there. Yeah.
That must have been some feeling to finally be by yourself in the F-16 and step into the jet, taxiing out, holding short. Now it's your turn to line up and wait and light the burners. Now that sensation must have been incredible.
Yeah, I don't remember if I wrote about it in the book, but I had dreams about that moment, taxiing onto the runway at Luke Air Force Base, seeing the mountains in the distance, being on the tip of that spear and like pushing the throttle up. I dreamt about it, and it motivated me for years. And I always had an exhale, and then I never took off in my dreams. But I found, like when I was thinking about it, I never actually went through it. It's like nope, you got to get to that point, and then you can enjoy it. And, fortunately, that day happened, and it was. But yeah,
that's pretty good because some people's dreams never take off. So you certainly achieved something. That's and right. So now your first night flight. Now to the rounded canopy, did reflections, did that play on situation or like disorientations, or is there any influence that canopy had from?
Yeah, you would always see the screens reflecting. You'd always, I think there was the monitor or the TV screen between your legs below the main screen. That one would always reflect, so you'd always dim that one down because it would just create this like beam of light. So yeah, you're always fighting with it a little bit. Yeah.
And night vision goggles.
Yeah, I mean they're great. They're cool. They're cool.
Okay.
I would say in the F-22, I didn't use them nearly as much. They're really heavy and they pull on your neck, and they're really good if you're in visual formations with other airplanes. You can see their airplanes very well. In fact, the flashing lights, you can see them for hundreds of miles away, almost a problem. You might be looking at light and you don't know if it's 5 miles away or 100 miles away. But it's really great for looking at the ground too. Whereas the F-22, you don't usually fly in visual formation, so you're not looking at another airplane. We're generally not looking at the ground. We're usually only looking at enemy, or we're only up where we're not engaging and closer in range like the F-16 is. So I always had them with me in the F-22, but a lot of times you wouldn't wear them unless you needed them.
That's an interesting point, and I'm not going to go on a tangent here, but in World War I, your wingman was a rock's throw away from you in some cases. World War II, a little further out. Korea, you're higher, faster, a little further out. You just said that you don't always see your wingman in the F-22. Does that mean that your spread is that great because the capability of this jet is that great? Is that
motivation? Yeah. I mean, in fact, if you see him, it's like we're doing something wrong. In fact,
wow.
There's like comm that we have to do to say, hey, I see you. Did you know you're this close to me? You're not supposed to be. Essentially. So yeah, as technology has progressed and the data links between the airplanes has progressed, I think even now the F-16, F-15, their formations are getting more spread apart too. Because as a wingman, if you're close to another airplane, your number one priority is not hitting the other jet. And so you're not as tactically useful. If you're having to spend 50% of your time paying attention to the other airplane so you don't hit him, that's 50% less time than you can be looking at your radar or looking at your targeting pod. Thinking about tactics. So the less stress you have there, the more stress you can put on the enemy.
There you are. And that's what we want. We want to put stress on the enemy.
That's right.
Yeah. So you've done night flights, you've gone to gunnery, you've done a lot of low-level, high-speed flights, clicking along at 500 knots at 500 feet off the ground, all these different profiles, mountain flying. The mountains are a little bit bigger. You've flown in all these and now it's you're graduating and you're going to report to the South Dakota National Guard, the Lobos, the 175th. What squadron is that?
That's right.
175th is. How were you? Because you're like the new guy. You're the lack of a better term. You're the FNG. And was it you and another individual that reported?
Yep. Yeah, one other guy and I went together the whole training together. Yeah.
Oh, that is very cool. That's very cool. And what was that like reporting to you are a combat rated pilot. You are a war fighter at this point. You are a combat rated pilot that is now reporting to the Lobos, the 175th South Dakota Air National Guard. You are an F-16. Now, you had to have been like on cloud nine driving onto that place and reporting.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it'd been 3.5 years since I drove away from that place to go become a fighter pilot. So it'd been a long journey, right? It's probably like it's the whole fighter pilot culture and ethos is a humbling one. We make fun of each other all the time. We have parties and tell stories on each other. All of our call signs they might sound cool-ish, but they're all degrading. And then so to have just graduated the F-16's training, I remember the commander at that graduation said that we were fighter pilots, and that was the first time a fighter pilot had ever called me a fighter pilot. I remember that moment vividly. That was a very big moment for me. Like, okay, I'm in this fraternity now. But then, you're also the lowest man on the totem pole. So you're you're in this culture where we make fun of. I'm going to be the worst pilot. Me and the new guy are going to be the two worst pilots in that squadron for a while, at a minimum. So it's like this. You're very high in life and cocky, but you're also very low and humbled at the same time. So it's a funny dynamic.
What on that thread of funny, you are given a call sign in the squadron.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, the rule
talk
goes
about that.
Yeah, the rule goes that you're supposed to buy me a drink to hear the story. So I guess each listener can, every time they see me, I can get a drink. But I'll humor you guys.
We'll send you something from Sierra Nevada up here, just north of us.
Yeah.
What is your call sign, sir?
Yeah, so my call sign CHOP is an acronym.
Those are good.
Yeah, most of them are. Unless most call signs are an acronym, unless the last name is like a natural progression. Like my last name is Fox, and so you could call me like Megan Fox. Like that would have been a funny, just play on my last name. But no, I got an acronym, and it comes from a bomb and mission. So you get your call sign right after you're mission qualified. So if we go to war, it's time to go. That's when they're gonna give you your call sign. Is a couple months after that, usually, once you've been blessed with that. Mine is from a bombing mission. We were going down to Salina, Kansas to drop bombs. So we had little bombs on our jet, and we're going to go do target practice, essentially. And I had to pee. And so, like I told you in the T-38, I had to unclip. So, yeah, I unclipped all the seats. So first you safe the seat so you don't accidentally eject yourself not strapped in. So you safe the seat, you turn the HUD off so that you remember that you've safed the seat and you've undone your seat belts. And they give us a little bag with some chemical in it. And so there I am peeing. But remember that you're sitting down, the seat reclines 30 degrees. It's not an easy operation to go to the restroom in an airplane that you're sitting down. So I was midway going through that and everything's going fine. And there was a radio frequency change. And so I stopped myself peeing, bragging. And then I went up and changed the radio frequency, but while I did, I resumed peeing uncontrolled. And so I peed all over that cockpit, all over myself, all over everything. And so I did the whole mission, came back, landed, and I just handed my secret hard drive off to my friend. I was like, I'm going home. I'll be back in 45 minutes. I got to go take a shower. And I had to clean the plane out. It was disgusting. And so CHOP stands for can't handle, own. I'll let you fill in the blank there. Keep it G-rated.
That's good. Especially a tactical jet, especially an F-16, having to go pee can be a problem, especially if the taxiing out is a little delayed, taking off is pushed back, and now you got to play catch up, and you have to go pee even harder. And just things happen and you can't go pee if it's a 1.5 flight, 1 hour and a half flight or so, just getting home from Walmart, having to go pee could be painful. I could imagine being strapped down in that case.
Well, we flew those F-16s to Hawaii and Korea. My combat sorties over Syria, all those flights were more than 10 hours sitting in one of those airplanes. So I would get out of those planes with like 8 or 9 bags of urine. Wow. So it was wild times.
We won't go too much into the bombing missions in Korea, or I'm sorry, in Syria, but that had to be some really difficult airspace to navigate through, and there were so many foreign players involved, and not all of them allies. That brief and debrief must have been just as bad as navigating the airspace.
Yeah, the rules of engagement for that theater were wild. If I talk to anybody about it, I kind of compare it to what I think the Wild West was like. There was everyone was kind of flying. There were tons of airplanes airborne. Mm-hmm. Everyone's armed with weapons. Mm-hmm. And sometimes you didn't know who the plane was, or you didn't really know what their intention was. So imagine you're riding up on a horse in the middle of the Wild West, and you're like, I don't think he wants to shoot me, but I know he's got a gun and I've got a gun. And so you're like always kind of ready to see what's going to happen. But the Russians were flying, the Iranians were flying, the Syrians were flying, the Turks were flying. It was a congested airspace. And when you're in an F-22, the last thing you want to do is be the guy who makes the mistake in that plane. That's kind of the more public-facing airplane. America's pride and joy. So it was a stressful time, but it was interesting.
Now we're gonna back up, because we know you flew the F-16 for the Lobos, but you ended your Air Force time flying the F-22. How did that happen?
Yeah, Reserve Squadron in Florida just sent out an email saying, hey, we're looking for a young guy, lieutenant or captain, doesn't even need to be a flight lead, to be a young person in their reserve squadron. They didn't have any young guys really. And so I went up to my boss, the Lobos, and I was like, hey man, you guys, they forwarded it out to all of us. And I was like, I didn't even know I could leave the guard unit. I don't want to be a guy that is a deserter or anything like that. Like
a quitter, huh?
Man, yeah, but at the same time, I'd love to fly the F-22 in Florida. Like, that sounds amazing. He's like, my commander at that time was like, yeah, man, if I was in your shoes, I would be doing the same thing. So we bless.
No hard feelings.
No, I'm still good friends with a lot of them. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So they understood it was a great opportunity for my career. And so that's what I went and did.
There are no two-seater F-22, so your first flight's a solo flight.
Yeah. They used to do 3 or 4 flights in an F-16 for the new guys. The guys who went from T-38 to F-22. They would do 2 or 3 in an F-16 to get kind of used to it with someone in the back seat. But now they don't even do that. They just you get your 13 or so simulator rides, and then you're good to go. It's honestly not that hard of an airplane to land. It's a lot bigger. It's 70 or 80,000 pounds. It's a lot bigger than the F-16. Like it just is a solid built airplane, and the HUD and the flight path marker, it's not too bad.
No, and it can do some crazy maneuvers. It's got thrust vectoring, very powerful motors on that thing.
That's right.
A typical cruise at 60,000 feet supersonic without afterburner.
No, we wouldn't typically cruise there, but we could do it. So yeah.
Can you hear the air? I mean, you've got a helmet on, and this could apply to the F-16, the F-16, the F-22, but can you hear the air rushing over the canopy?
Yeah, I mean, most, to include airliners, most of the noise that you're hearing, I think, is air rush. So if you're down low going faster, it gets loud. Up higher, it gets quieter because there's a lot less air density. So yeah, I mean, you could hear it the faster you're going, but even doing Mach 2 at 60,000 feet, the air is so thin up there. I don't recall the noise. I don't remember that standing out. I remember standing out that if you look up, it's black instead of blue at 60,000 feet. And you can see the curvature of the Earth pretty well at that height, but I don't remember sound being a thing.
No flat Earth or F-22 pilots out there, I imagine.
No, I don't think there are. Yeah, I would have to dispel that.
Right. That's right. That'll be for somebody else's podcast.
That's right.
But what was as we're getting near the end of the hour, but the book Combat Ready: Lessons Learned in the Journey to Fighter Pilot, and I alluded to this, that these lessons apply to a lot of different things, not specifically to fighter pilot, but for your first book, and I've read a lot of books, but it was really laid out well. And were you documenting your journey as you were going through the journey?
Yeah, basically the first week of training, I had so many people reach out to me saying, "Hey, what happened? What was?" I think it was even just like my medical exam. People were just curious about the Air Force or what the military was like, and they were excited
Mm-hmm.
for me.
Mm-hmm.
And I hate to repeat myself, and
Okay.
so I was like, "Well, there's no way I can keep telling everyone these stories." So every Sunday for 3 years, I wrote a quick summary to my family and friends, and at the end, I had, I think, 180,000 words of "This is the
Wow.
journey." And so it took me 2 or 3 more years to edit it down to that. The book probably would have been 3 times as long with everything that I
Mm-hmm.
said, but I whittled it down to what I thought was interesting.
Well,
So
it's a 255-page book. It's a easy read. It's a good read. Um, and you've included some of the photographs that were taken. These aren't stock footage, but these are actual photographs of you. Your first takeoff in the F-22. You're returning from a training mission with 3 other F-16s. And when you guys deployed to Korea, did you go to Osan when you made that deployment, or where did you go?
we went to Kunsan.
Kunsan. Oh, okay.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
But it's a different Air Force over there, isn't it?
That's right. Yeah, I was glad I got to see Kunsan.
Yeah.
For those who don't know, Kunsan's kind of like they always say the last bastion of real fighter pilot. Shenanigans and fun, and yeah, it was a fun place.
Ah, awesome.
Yeah,
And you did your time in the Air Force, and you mentioned that you are now an airline pilot for Delta, flying 767s.
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Yep.
is that do you get to pick the airframe you fly when you become an airline pilot, or do they tell you what they need and this is what's available?
The whole system is seniority based, so based on when you're hired. But at this stage, I could pick any plane that I wanted to go fly. Whether you're a captain or a first officer depends on your time at the company and what plane. But yeah, I chose this one. I live in New York City, and it flies to Europe a lot. I like Europe or Buenos Aires or Honolulu. So it's the long flights, the easy ones. We get paid by the minute in the airline industry, and so it's a lot easier to cruise for 8 hours, getting paid the same minute than it is doing a bunch of work around the United States.
Good for you.
And the wine tastes better over there.
The what?
Yeah. And the wine and the beer taste better over there.
Yeah, I was stationed in Germany. I was actually in the Army, but yeah, the beer was and it was room temperature most of the time.
That's right.
As well. Yeah.
Yeah.
But what for some pilots, they choose to fly for FedEx or UPS or Omega or whatever because they just prefer to fly cargo. Is there any turnoffs about flying for FedEx or cargo jets in particular?
Well, as we record this, that industry is not doing well at all, and they're not hiring pilots, and they're getting rid of them. So you always want hiring going on because it helps your seniority and that helps your life. The other turnoffs, I always said no. Just there's a lot of behind the clock flying, meaning overnight. A lot of shipping gets done during the middle of the night.
It does.
And then the last thing is I just love traveling. So the travel benefits of flying at Delta, I can look for open seats and fly around the world, whereas UPS and FedEx, they don't have that quite an arrangement like Delta does. So yeah, it was kind of.
Is there a high mix of prior service in Delta?
Yeah, there is. We were definitely before. I don't know what the mix is, honestly. If you told me 50-50, I'd probably believe you.
Okay.
But I could be off. I'm guessing though. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah,
well, you could always tell your friends that you were on the Flying Dutchman podcast, and that'll actually aid in your seniority ascension. Yeah. But
I can always one up them in a conversation now.
Yeah, you can.
Yeah.
But you've written your first book, but you are also writing children's books. Is that?
Yeah, I've got. When you're an airline pilot and you got a lot of free time on your hand generally, and so
can we talk about that?
Yeah. My nephews, I got 3 nephews, and I got so tired of hearing them say how cool trains and trucks and dinosaurs were, and I was like, there's just not any good propaganda out there for cool airplanes. So if there's not any, there must be a need for it. So I wrote The Adventures of Aero Squad, and so I go through Robbie Raptor, and you go through I take each plane and apply its identity in the real Air Force. And in fact, all my buddies typically laugh about it. The F-22, it's a stealthy fighter jet, so its friends don't notice him. And so how the F-16, it tries to do everything, can't really focus on anything, and so it, it really wants to be a member of the Thunder Chickens, and so you need to learn to work hard and focus. Pedro Panther is based on the F-35. That one's about to come out, but that plane's a little. We make fun of it because it looks a little chunky, and so it's got body image issues, and it's overcoming that.
Do they not refer to the F-35 as Pregnant Amy in the Air Force? Have you heard that expression?
It's Fat Amy is what I'm aware of.
Oh,
the nickname is Fat Amy from what I'm aware of. Yeah, that's not great.
Yeah, we won't find that in the children's book. But which reminds me, I'm writing a book called Combat Aircraft Rehab. That's a joke, but
nice. There you go.
Yeah, the A-10s take out the garbage, man. But anyway, where can we find the children's books?
Exactly.
Where would we find the children's books in your?
They're on Amazon. Yeah, if you look up. Yeah, they're all on Amazon. Yeah, appreciate it. If you search my name, Taylor Fox, they'll come up, or Robbie Raptor, or Aero Squad, or whatever. But they're there. So.
Well, here on out, you were known as Chop to the show. So,
sounds good.
Yeah. So in future interviews, I might say, and I was talking to Chop the other day, and so we're about at that hour mark now, and this being my first episode, I've got a lot of learning to do, but I can tell you that I so enjoyed the conversation, and
likewise,
I definitely enjoyed the book, and this is going on my bookshelf. And so is there anything you want to close out with? And after we're done recording, we have a conversation that we're going to have, just kind of close things out on a personal note and stuff. But anything you want to leave the audience with, or there's individuals out there that want to be a pilot, and maybe not necessarily a fighter pilot. Maybe some just want to get a private pilot's license. Maybe some of them, for me, if I was to ever go that route, the B-52 is my favorite. But is there any just advice for young people out there, men and women, that might want to fly one day?
Yeah, no, I mean, it has been a wonderful profession for my life, from when I was a kid to just cruising around, and it's just you see amazing and beautiful things to, it pays the bills very well right now and gives a nice quality of life. The journey through the Air Force is the most rewarding one I'll ever have. That camaraderie with my friends. If I got married tomorrow, every one of the groomsmen would be an Air Force buddy, that trust and bond that you get to experience there, and you get to see and do things unlike anything else I've experienced. So anyone who's thinking about going on the path, especially the Air Force path, the book was written for you, honestly. Like that's as close as it's going to get to what I don't really hold back on pros and cons, but as you'll read, most of them are pros, it's mostly good. So I highly jump on board. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it spells it out. And the guard way, I think, is probably the best way for lowest risk. So
I agree. And what stands out is prep. A lot of prep. Prep before a flight, prep before a test. Sometimes that means you're not going to go hang out with the bros on a Saturday night because you're going to prep. You're going to be very prepared. Preparation. Yeah, that's something that definitely stands out.
Yeah, that's the thing I've really realized lately, even working on other projects in my life. Just like once I was truly passionate about being a fighter pilot, like everything else kind of falls off. Like everything, the prioritization there became very clear, and discipline and determination after that is going to help you get to whatever you're shooting for. It doesn't matter if it's a pilot or not, but
exactly.
That was my big takeaway from that whole experience. Yeah. So
very cool.
Anyway.
Well, we'll say goodbye to our audience, and thank you gals for sticking with us for this first episode of the Flying Dutchman podcast. There will be others coming up. And if there are anybody that'd like to be on the show, you could reach out to me. I have a YouTube channel as well, and Dutch at flyingdutchmanpodcast.com website is my email address. Actually, the website is being built, and I'm trying to make this successful, fun, and share my passion for aviation. And I appreciate Chop being on my channel, my first guest, which enters him into the lightning round to win a free sticker. All right, you guys, enough playing around. Thank you again for being on the show, Chop, and thank my audience for participating. And hit that like button. Oh wait, that's YouTube, right? All right. Go have fun, stay hydrated, and eat right.
Godspeed, fill me. I will find that sunshine, some beauty on the rise. Yeah. Sunlight, good night.